I just wanted to let you know about a brand new workshop series that I've got coming up. It's called Reclaim Your Calm, and it's an introduction to EFT tapping to help you regulate your emotions and thrive with ADHD. This is a 2-part live online workshop. So it's introducing you to the power of tapping to help you break free from emotional overwhelm, calming your ADHD mind, and reclaiming your peace anytime, anywhere. I really want to empower you with some simple and practical ways using EFT to help you find more calm, more groundedness, especially when we are facing them in everyday life. There's all these stresses around us. And I know with ADHD that we do find it hard to regulate ourselves in these heightened moments. So if you are struggling to stay grounded in the chaos of life, or you're experiencing these big emotional reactions to what other people would perceive as small triggers, perhaps you are sensitive or fearful of rejection. We see that in RSD. Or you are craving more calm and stability with your nervous system. I really want to share with you ways to use tapping, whether it's a couple of minutes a day, whether it's using words, or perhaps just breath work, to bring more of this regulation into your life. Now, I will be teaching you this over 2 hours, and what I will be bringing to you are tools for daily life, but you can also share them with children, teenagers, partners, friends. I'm really going to be teaching you the basics because, as we know with EFT, we can use it for quite complicated situations like trauma or PTSD. So I am really excited to be able to bring this to you. It's going to be happening on the 4th and the 11th of December at 6:30 p.m. UK time. It's all going to be on Zoom, and it is £80 for the 2 workshops. Now, I have a discount code for you. If you use it this week, it is EBCALM. That's EBCALM. Use that discount code and you can get £10 off. Go straight to my website. It's adhdwomenswellbeing.co.uk. That's adhdwomenswellbeing.co.uk. And you'll see on the homepage, click through link, go through there. And I really hope that you'll find this workshop series as helpful as I do with regards to using tapping pretty much in everyday life. It's perfect for the ADHD brain. It's perfect for the ADHD nervous system. And I want to share all this knowledge and wisdom with you. Now back to today's episode. Welcome to the ADHD Women's Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Kate Moore-Youssef, and I'm a wellbeing and lifestyle coach, EFT practitioner, mum to 4 kids, and passionate about helping more women to understand and accept their amazing ADHD brains. After speaking to many women just like me, and probably you, I know there is a need for more health and lifestyle support for women newly diagnosed with ADHD. In these conversations, you'll learn from insightful guests, hear new findings, and discover powerful perspectives and lifestyle tools to enable you to live your most fulfilled, calm, and purposeful life wherever you are on your ADHD journey. Here's today's episode. We're here to talk about all aspects of ADHD and neurodivergence, and today is very much no different. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my guest, Abigail Ajay Jones. And Abigail is an award-winning policy and strategy advisor, diversity, equity and inclusion champion, community builder, and a neurodiversity advocate. She has over 10 years' experience and is known for her work in amplifying underserved voices and fostering an inclusive culture. And she's been recognised as one of the top 20 influential neurodivergent women in 2022 and received an MBE for her public service. She's a passionate and engaging speaker, and Abigail has delivered talks globally, including her notable TEDx talk, Yes, Black Women Have ADHD Too and Need Your Attention. I watched it, Abigail. It was fantastic. And I have to say, I literally want to salute you for doing that because it looks terrifying. So welcome to the podcast. Hopefully this will be a much less terrifying experience than a TEDx talk.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you so much for having me. I love your podcast. And yeah, like I always say, TEDx's they're not the most ADHD friendly environment. Trying to remember, no. I'm still yet to part of the RSD, probably watch it to the end, but I do remember like struggling to memorize it and just winging bits of it from what I could remember. But yeah, it was definitely
Well, it was brilliant. It was brilliant. And I have to say, I was watching you and I was thinking, Why do they not have an auto cue? Why is there not like a prompting kind of thing? Like, there's no way I would have been able to stand there. And I can talk and riff about ADHD for ages, but if you told me to memorize it and process it, my working memory, and it just shows, doesn't it? It's just another example of, like when kids are at school and they're judged on memory with their GCSEs and dates and stats and all of that. And you could be the most intelligent person in the world, but if your working memory is different, you're perceived as a failure. And I just wondered, I mean, let's start with the TEDx talk. Did you ask them, did you say to them, this is not working with the way my brain likes to work? And how did they kind of come back with that?
And I think sometimes you realize that you're still kind of battling sometimes your own like internalized ableism, because in the process I did kind of touch on it in the beginning, and then I told myself I'm going to push myself to do this, and I look back and I'm like, well, why would you do that? You talk about wanting to create more neuro-inclusive working environments, it's okay. So I feel like sometimes there is still that internalized ableism that you want to try and do things along with other people. So it was touched on, and they were like, no, we don't really, we do try and encourage people to memorize it. And I think for so long, I was so focused on like doing all the research and putting it all together that I didn't really think about that bit. So I was kind of like in my head, I will get to that and I'll find a way to memorize it. And then when I got to that bit, I thought, no, this is actually, you're doing a bit of a disservice to yourself. So I kind of towards the end was just kinder to myself and thought, you know what, you kind of, as long as you know the main structures and points you want to hit, if you mess up a bit, it's okay. You can incorporate and make a bit of a joke, which I think I kind of did at the beginning, that, yeah, this isn't the most ADHD, this isn't the best for someone with ADHD, working memory organization trying to do this, but give it a go. So, but I think it's something that I wish I did probably push a bit more. But I know a few people have done, and I'm always interested to hear other neurodivergent people, their experiences. Because, I think it definitely, it should be encouraged, and it should, if we're trying to create and we're sending messages, and TEDx is supposed to be, showing an important message, then we should make them as inclusive for people as possible.
Yeah, because obviously you clearly knew your stuff, the passion was there and everything. And I mean, I always kind of think about my kids and where they are and how the education system is not supporting neurodivergent kids even now. And I talk about GCSEs all the time and how it's just a complete mirror to how broken the education system is, because that is reflective on where the kids stay at school, whether they have the confidence and the self-esteem to then kind of go, you know what, I'm capable of A levels, I'm capable of university education. But if they can't do 8 to 10 subjects, whatever it is at GCSE, and memorize all the things and retain the information and not get overwhelmed and all of that, then that's where their education kind of stops. And we know that there's a much higher ratio of children, I guess, that leave school at 16 with ADHD and don't fulfill their potential. And I guess even more so in the marginalized communities where, let's talk about it. In the Black community, I know that you say that there's still a stigma there. There's still a lack of awareness and understanding of potentially what ADHD is. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about your experience, because I'd be so interested to hear it.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. Everything you said is totally correct. And I think that's why it's so important to have conversations like this, because you're right. We are still, I think, often working in environments that just aren't conducive and benefit all people. And I always say creating more neuro-inclusive working environments benefit everybody, because it's just thinking about ways we can make things easier for all. And I think when I reflect back on mine, so I got, like a lot of us, especially women, got my ADHD diagnosis much later on in life. And I definitely reflect back on school and doing generally well in subjects that I was really passionate about and I had an understanding for, kind of more the creatives, English, history. If I could find that niche or interest, I really captured my mind. But other subjects, I was never really good at science. My mum always said that I was quite good at maths until it got to a certain point. And my mum said she feels like I always overcomplicated things. She always thought the simplest of things I would find like hard, and then things that she couldn't get her mind around. So I don't know if it was just a different way that my mind worked. But I definitely reflect back on kind of looking at school reports of, yes, Abigail kind of being chatty, but always asking lots of questions. I think that's just because of how my mind worked. And Abigail kind of just needs to kind of be a bit more still. Her mind is always wandering. She's always thinking about different things, always asking those different questions. I think there's a lot of that kind of inquisitiveness that in women can kind of be seen more as a personality trait. She's kind of scatty. She's just disorganized. If she could just kind of be a bit more still or focused, she could do more. So I feel like there was definitely history in school of kind of feeling like I'm just missing out on my potential a bit. So I think that definitely came up a lot. And then I think university was where I really found things challenging. So I definitely found things challenging in kind of secondary school. And I think I tended to always just miss out. So I missed out on the university I wanted to go to. And I think now I look back, it's because it was the testing that I often think I found more challenging. So I'd find things really interesting, but under test conditions. And I didn't know that I had dyspraxia or ADHD at the time. I think I often had a real challenge with finishing exams in the time, or I could at one point I think there was always that inconsistency. One point I would do well, and then I could totally misread something. So university, where I decided to do a law degree. Again, I think more of the cultural things. I think coming from a British Ghanaian background, you're often taught that it has to be a career. So I was really interested in like history and politics. And I considered doing that at uni. And mum was like, oh, but you thought about law. I was always passionate about kind of human rights. So my mum was like, oh, we would talk about things. And I thought I wanted to be a human rights lawyer. So mum was like, well, why don't you do a law degree? Which I think I found very challenging at uni. I think the amount of information to read, to understand, I really struggled in university at that stage. So I was really struggling with, the level of work, the amount of research, like all that area. So I think that's where there was really those challenges. And even looking back at school and university, I think there was definitely a history of often looking around and feeling like, why is it taking me so? I feel like I'm putting just as much effort into things and more effort. I feel like I'm staying up later, or I'm trying to do this, and it just seems to be coming easier to people. And I can never really understand why. So I think, again, that diagnosis later on in life definitely helped me understand that there's different ways my brain works and there's different ways I do things, and that's okay. Because I think when you don't have that understanding, you're constantly trying to do things the way other people are doing it and not understanding why it's not working for you in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, did anyone during school ever flag up that there was some kind of like learning difference? Or did anyone ever say, oh, you might need some extra time, or check in with your parents? Like, was there any form of kind of insinuation that you might need some extra support?
No, I think there was always just kind of an element of she maybe needs to just push herself a bit more. It's like there was always a feeling of like maybe the foundations are there, but I think there was more of a thinking of she's not trying hard enough. Maybe it's because she's being too talkative. She's asking too many questions. I think that was looked kind of as a negative, and not maybe understanding that why does she ask these questions? Why are there challenges in understanding things? It wasn't so I got my dyspraxia diagnosis in university, and that was from another person I was at university with who had dyspraxia, and they thought, I think we just generally were having discussions. I couldn't write about, I couldn't do a lot of these things. And she's like, I think you might be like, I'm dyspraxic, and I think you might be dyspraxic. I remember speaking to this person who was like, your posture, you can't ride a bike, you struggle with your left to right, all this stuff, and then your essays and stuff, I think it might be dyspraxia. So that's when I went to university and was like, this dyspraxia word has come up from someone. What is this something to look into? And then that's when they were able to kind of get somebody to speak to me, and I got a dyspraxia diagnosis in university, and then ADHD much later on. But prior to that, no, there'd never been anything talked about that made me think there was any further support needed.
Yeah. So what's really interesting is that what we know now is that, any of these neurodevelopmental differences don't travel alone. They always travel with a partner, with a friend. Yeah. I always see it's like a co-driver, co-rider, and it just depends. You can have quite a few in the back or one or two. Mm-hmm. Depends who's driving, and it depends who's got like the foot on the pedal. And that's kind of like how I see all these different types of neurodiversity, is that your dyspraxia may have just been a bit louder at the time, and it might have just been more prominent. And then different times in our life, like the ADHD then takes over, and we find a way to kind of like manage the dyspraxia. And I see it, with myself, with my family, like all the different things, whether it's dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dyslexia, there's always like a bedfellow with the ADHD. With other things like OCD as well, and anxiety. And when we understand it, it kind of normalizes it. And I try really hard to have these kind of conversations with my kids where, my daughter, one of them the other day came home, and she, bless her, is like very gangly, long arms, long legs.
Yes.
And I got her assessed for dyslexia maybe when she was like 6, I don't know, 5 or 6. And it kind of came back inconclusive, because some ways it did show up.
Yes.
Some ways it didn't, but she's always been really clumsy. And like, she, bless her, she's made a joke out of it, but I know sometimes there is shame there. And she said the other
Mm.
day she fell down the stairs at school with her friends, and
Oh,
my little heart, like, just wanted to, I was like so sad, but she was sort of laughing. And then she showed me her knee and it was all cut open. And obviously she scrambled up and picked up her bag and everything, and her friends kind of like picked her up and they were laughing. But I know in her, there was probably some internalized shame there where she's like, why can't I walk down the stairs and not trip over my feet, or, that type of thing. And so I try and explain that to her and say, well, you do know there's like dyspraxia there, because even though it didn't come back conclusive, we do know it's there. And when you have these conversations and you just sort of say it as it is, or when there's things like now with your ADHD and how you're able to have that awareness and reflect and say, but that's what I do find really difficult. And that was a real challenge for me. And maybe if a teacher had turned around and said, there's a reason why you struggle under pressure, but you're really good when you're asking lots of questions and processing it verbally. And I think with ADHD people, we really do process things really well verbally, which is why I think during these kind of conversations in a podcast, we can really get into the nitty gritty.
exactly.
And there's like self-reflection moments. But I guess going back to your passion and where you advocate within the Black community, what is going on that is different to what I experience as a white person? Why is there still less understanding, less awareness, and I guess less support and advocacy? I'd love to hear from what you're hearing, you're seeing, and maybe what you've experienced as well.
Yeah, I think there's a number of things, and when that kind of those intersectional elements come. So we know the experiences and challenges that women can often have with ADHD and neurological conditions and the differences, and then adding that element with Black women. When I was doing a lot of my research, a lot of things came up, and I think that often can start from a young age. So I think Black women did more likely to have a late diagnosis or misdiagnosis. And when I was doing a lot of the research and reflecting on kind of my own experiences, something called adultification comes up quite a lot. So adultification of Black girls and Black boys. And it's this element of kind of young people being seen as older than they are and being treated as older. And it was really interesting when I was doing a lot of research and kind of looking into reports and reflecting on some of my own experience sometimes in school as well, is sometimes Black girls and Black boys are more likely to be expelled from school than kind of white counterparts. And something that came up when I was kind of looking at reports, especially by an organization called Agenda, they were saying things that would come up, and what they were hearing back is Black girls and children kind of being treated older, or that they need kind of less support. And things that will come up is when they are kind of needing more support, they kind of being seen more as disruptive. So sometimes I think because of that adultification and that kind of being seen as older, and we see it in the criminal justice system where Black children and Black people are more likely to be seen as older and get harsher treatment. Sometimes when you're seen as more adult-like, you're not really treated as a child that needs that support. So that's something that was really interesting when I was doing a lot of that research. I think there's also a lot of fear of stigmatization for Black families. So I think there is a history in the education and healthcare system that there can be quite a fraught relationship with Black communities. So I know that, for instance, Black children mentioning that kind of more likely to be expelled, there's tendencies to have kind of more negative experiences with educational and health systems that can make it that fear of being stigmatized. You don't want your child to be seen as lazy or bad. So sometimes there's that fear of kind of being associated with any labels. And that's something I've definitely heard before. I was recently doing a panel talk with the Ghanaian Association of Social Workers, and it was really interesting to hear some of their experiences. And they were talking about working closely with communities, and then kind of when they do say that they think, oh, your child might need more support, might be dyslexic, have ADHD, dyspraxia, there's that real fear of, I don't want my child to be labelled as stupid or have more problems. They're already kind of dealing with racism in situations. I don't want them to kind of have more labels that are deemed as negative. So I think that's something that kind of can come up as well, which is really interesting to hear as well. And I think some of the few other things that can also come up is just that sometimes when you are from a Black minority or immigrant background, that kind of working twice as hard narrative is really instilled in you. And I definitely reflect on that. And I think, not intentionally, but I think my parents were always kind of like, no, we see that you're a smarter child and you are a hardworking child. You're from a Black background. You're especially I moved to Essex at quite a young age. So I was used to being in backgrounds where I'd often be one of the only Black children in class. So I think sometimes you'd be taught that you have to work twice as hard. Things are going to be more challenging. You have to push yourself harder. So you're often just thinking, well, that's maybe what I need to do. So sometimes I would think that I must not be working hard enough. Maybe that's what it is. And things are going to be challenging. And maybe teachers are going to be harsher on me because I'm different. So I just have to prove myself. So I think that's something that I reflect on. And I didn't realize that I did need more support. And I was having challenges tying my shoelaces, and I was kind of having challenges with my coordination and asking more questions to get a better understanding. I was doing that to learn more, but sometimes you can feel a bit more like you want to kind of assimilate. I think that's really taught, especially when you're from a minority background. You want to assimilate with everyone else and try. So sometimes you're thinking, okay, maybe that's it. I just need to try and fit in. And I think that can be linked to that fear of labels. I think the other things, especially for a lot of Black women, when I'm having conversations, and especially when I did work in the Department of Health, that was something that constantly come up, is there's a lot of healthcare disparities. So I think there's a lot of barriers to access for Black women, access to quality care. There have been reports that kind of shown that Black women are more likely to deal with challenges with cultural competency and systematic racism. So I think that can be a lot of challenges, and especially engagement with a lot of communities. I do a lot of work with ADHD Babes. It's an amazing organisation that helps Black women and non-binary women. I think Viv has been on here, hasn't she?
She's been on the podcast.
Yeah, so I think when we're talking in those groups, Viv's amazing. I love working with them. And I think a lot that kind of comes up is that they really have to advocate for themselves. And there's a lot of kind of really being conscious that when you're in these spaces, you don't want to be deemed as an angry Black woman. You really want to share your experiences, but there can be that distrust in the medical health system, and there can also be those challenges when you are trying to advocate that, oh, are you sure it's that? And I think when going through work first and telling them that I thought I might have ADHD, I think helped me, because I was able to not get official diagnosis, but a workplace assessment that I think helped me go to my GP. And I kind of had something. There was still kind of a lot of, you seem to have done well in school. Are you sure it's not anxiety? And all these things can be part of it, but they're often exacerbated because that original ADHD diagnosis isn't in place. So I feel like, and I've heard a lot of women's experiences where it's kind of, especially Black women, really been dismissed, and it's been a lot of challenges and kind of really feeling like they have to advocate for themselves. I can think that's some of the challenges that definitely come up.
Wow. I mean, I'm hearing what it sounds like. It sounds incredibly exhausting, but also what you're fighting against is like this deeper systemic racism. There's trauma there's inherited trauma, it's generational, and you're battling something alongside the neurodivergence. Like as a white person, as a white woman's experience, it's deeply exhausting. We're masking, which, like you say, we're trying to fit in. We're wondering why does life feel harder for us when we're looking around and everyone else seems to kind of like have the handbook, and we're just like, why do we feel different? Why are we not understanding or processing things the same? And then for yourself, another Black women's experience, I wish there was more representation. I probably have done so many workshops, but I would say the proportion of Black women who come onto my workshop is probably, very small. And I often wonder, and I think, is it because of me? Is it because of what I represent? Or is it because not enough Black women are understanding their ADHD or understanding that it's there? Or is it just a blend of lots of things where they have just kind of know that they've got to keep a lid on everything, and they've got to keep quiet and not, cause too much fuss, because like you say, they're working twice as hard to just excel, succeed, be part of like society without having to, I don't know, there's so many cultural pressures and this systemic racism. And I kind of think, how can we make this easier? How can we have this conversation where ADHD spans across all communities? And I've had this conversation with the Asian communities, Jewish communities, Black communities. And it has to be like an open forum, so women can feel that they can speak within their communities and feel safe, but also help other people as well, talk about neurodivergence. So it's not a stigma. I mean, even I was diagnosed 4 years ago. And for the first 2 years of my diagnosis, there was still, even though I was helping lots of other women, I wasn't speaking publicly about it in, I guess, my community and with my friends and family. It still felt very shameful And
Yeah,
I
sure.
still get
Let's
it
do
to
it.
this day.
Absolutely.
Like, you don't look like you should have ADHD, or like, why you're really well educated, or you have got a family and your house looks really tidy, and just all these different kind of misrepresentations of what ADHD looks like in women and girls. And so it's we have to just break down these taboos and have these conversations. So, just interrupting today's podcast. And as you are probably a long time listener, you'll know that I'm an advocate of managing my ADHD symptoms naturally. And I take supplements because they've always played a huge part in supporting my mental and my physical health, as well as my nervous system. And one of the supplement ranges that I really love is the Herb Tender. So I'm delighted to have them sponsor this episode of the podcast. Now, the Herb Tender's naturally effective supplements are powered with intelligent adaptogens to help your body with everyday stress of ADHD. So these remarkable herbs and mushrooms can include lion's mane and reishi, which are both powerful to help us support our focus and our mood, our relaxation, our sleep naturally. And the Herb Tender's different supplements have been transformative for me. I really wanted you to know about them, hence them being the sponsor on today's podcast. They've helped me with my sleep, my focus, mood regulation, and anxiety. And this week, I want to give a special shout out to one of my favorites. It was named the best product for anxiety in the 2024 Beauty Shortlist Wellbeing Awards, and it's called the Herb Tender's Calm and Collected. Now, this supplement helps you to unwind your mind, soothe your anxious body, and ease more into sleep. So, if you're taking them regularly at night, Calm and Collect can help you to reduce anxiety symptoms and increase resilience. It can also be really effective at helping you stay calm, especially when your ADHD meds are beginning to wear off. I think many of us can relate to that. Now, if you are ready to enjoy a calmer and more regulated lifestyle, feeling more grounded, you can try the Herb Tenders Calm and Collected for 15% off using the code KATE15. So that is KATE15. You head to the website, it's www.the-herbtender.com. That's www.the-herbtender.com. Put in my code KATE15 and you'll get 15% off the Calm and Collected range. Now back to today's episode. I'd love to talk to you about the healthcare disparity and what happens, because I know, and again, forgive me if this is not 100% correct, but there's a horrific statistic of Black women are more likely to die in childbirth than white
Yes.
women.
Mm-hmm.
Where would that come from?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. So at one point, it was 5 times more likely, and that's where there's this amazing organization that does a lot of work on that called 5x more. Now I think it's gone down to 3.5, but still shocking figures. And I think my understanding of a lot of things I think come out from that is, I think, one, sometimes that culturally competent care. So I think there's sometimes still not an understanding of different people's experiences, especially from minority backgrounds. I know for a long time there was a range of misconceptions, and I remember I had friends who was nurses who were saying it was only until recently some of their textbooks didn't say things such as there was a thinking that Black women could handle pain more. So a lot of kind of really ignorant kind of thinking. And she said she remembers her early studying, some of this stuff was still alluded to in textbooks. So I think there's still a lot of that thinking that they can handle pain more. Sometimes that fear, back to what I was saying, kind of being deemed as angry. So it can be a catch-22 of sometimes you're kind of being silenced or not really being heard, and you're really having to advocate for yourself. Sometimes you're being dismissed. I think there's some of that fear. And yeah, I think there is a lot of expectation. And something else, a framework that I found really interesting, I think it's called Superwoman Schema. So it's this the idea of these cultural expectations are often placed on Black women to kind of have it all together, to be nurturers, to be domesticated, to kind of be there for everyone, means that they often are sacrificing their own well-being and own care. So I think that can be something where there's such, the outside world can be looking at them and placing all these expectations on them, and they can be placing it on themselves as well. So I think it can be a real mix of things. And I think that happens in a lot of places where we often see that disparity. So that's why I'm always thinking, yeah, it's so important for the advocacy work and to have those more community groups and organizations like 5X More, like ADHD Babes, do amazing work to encourage Black women and non-binary people to advocate for themselves more in ways that they can. But I think there also needs to be a lot more people and communities, health practitioners and education practitioners really kind of analyzing their own policies and making sure that they're kind of culturally competent and they are thinking about people from all marginalized communities' experiences. So I think that's some of it. And I think we definitely need to see things more Black mental health practitioners and more Black psychiatrists and more from diverse backgrounds as well, because just like it affects Black people, like you've mentioned, you see in the Asian communities, you see in the LGBT community are more likely to kind of get that diagnosis. So that intersectionality really does happen. And when we are kind of getting more of an understanding, it does help, I think, all communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think our generation, we're being cared for and looked after probably for, by generation 20 years older than us, who have not had that diversity, and they've not been taught by diverse professionals and teachers and lecturers. So like you say, it's this sort of like top-down filtration that's still not quite there. And I think, maybe the generation now that is, going through, medical school, training, all of that, there is definitely more diversity, and but we're not seeing it fast enough, and it's not filtering through. Like you say, if you're a Black person that wants to hear from a Black psychiatrist and understand ADHD through that lens and through that filter, and sort of like you say, all the cultural connotations and the nuances that maybe a white psychiatrist just wouldn't understand because it's not been their experience, but they've also not been taught, it's not in the textbooks. So they've only got one lens and one filter to go through. The very same way, ADHD is only, was only typically seen as in boys and men,
Exactly.
like up until very recently. So we're then there's a whole gender thing that's going on now with ADHD. And then if you're sort of bringing in the race and the culture side, unfortunately, we're not going to be hearing it from the professionals. And thankfully, we have people like you advocating and going on podcasts and doing TED Talks and going in and trying to train people within organizations. And anyone that's listening to this now kind of takes this mantle, hopefully that everyone does, to advocate wherever they are, whether it's, in their family, whether it's in a school. And we have this role, unfortunately, we may or may not want it, but until society changes, and unfortunately, I think it is going to be another big, long generation, we just have to kind of do what we can do within our little environments, our communities, that ripple effect. So whether it's in a church, or it's in a school, or it's in an organization, or it's in a Girl Scout group. I was, my daughter's part of a netball club, and I spoke to the head of the netball club, and there must be, I don't know, a couple of hundred girls who play netball. And I said, has anyone ever come in and spoken about neurodiversity and ADHD? She's like, no, but we probably should. I was like, I can guarantee you, if these girls are playing netball and they're training 2 or 3 times a week and they love it, there's going to be a high proportion of girls who are kind of channeling their ADHD through sport and getting, And so this is what I'm talking about. It's like wherever there's a high proportion of girls from whatever community, it's like get out there and be that advocate, because no one else is doing it for us.
And I think that's what's been, I think, so brilliant to see. I think especially in the community, especially seeing a lot of women, a lot of people from ethnic minority background, I think that's what's been so good about social media. And I know there can be a lot of people can worry about disinformation, but I think social media, podcasts, spaces like this really give people avenues to share their experience, to advocate, and to make people aware. And I think that's why I've enjoyed it, kind of being in panels, and that's why I do so much work and I've been really looking at lately in church. Like you said, Christianity plays a huge part in the Black community. So I have been looking at a lot of things about how I can really get people to understand in church, because there can be that fear with Christianity and kind of mental health and all these things. Like where we do have these spaces and access, I think it is so important to kind of advocate and to make people aware and to create that support. So I think, that's what's been good. That I think a lot of this groundwork we're doing now can feel small, but in the long run, I think is helping create awareness on a bigger scale.
I wonder about that when you talk about Christianity in the Black communities. And there's obviously traditional roles that are seen. And we know that Sarah Solden talked about this back in the early 90s, and she called them she messages. And that is what we hold from a conditioning perspective, like women's roles should, in inverted commas, should be the homekeepers, the caretakers, the parents, the cooks, the cleaners, the this, the that. And when we can't fulfill that role, then that's like a negative impact on our self-esteem and our
Yes.
confidence. And then other
Yes.
people see us, and then, like you say, it's like a negative trait. There's something that's wrong with us, because if she can't keep her home organized or she forgets things, then what kind of mother is she? And I wonder if that is something quite systemic as well in the Black community, if you have to kind of have it all together from a domestic perspective.
Yes, I think definitely. And I think, like you're saying, that's where I think a lot of those societal and cultural expectations, I know, coming from a background, especially being a British Ghanaian, some of those challenges that I've definitely faced, and you feel a lot of shame in, is the idea that, yeah, you're taught that you have to be domesticated. As a Black British Ghanaian woman, domesticated, a nurturer, kind of take care of everybody. And when you feel like you're not fulfilling all of that, there can be a lot of that shame, and you're taught, yeah, that you just have to, like I mentioned earlier on, kind of work twice as hard. Things are going to kind of be harder. You've kind of got to deal with it. So I think there can be a lot of that shame of feeling like you're not doing enough, or why is it more challenging? And there can be a lot of that shame, which is why I think, especially having those community groups and support groups is so important, to hear other women who are from a similar background to you. And I definitely, when I look back, especially working in the civil service for the number of years I did thoroughly enjoy it. But when I first got that ADHD diagnosis, there was a part of that kind of internalized ableism and shame that thought, oh, this is like another label now. I'm already kind of a Black young woman. There's not many people who look like me working in this space. I know I have to work hard. And now if I bring this other label, is there more shame? Is there going to be more barriers? So there's a lot of that kind of internalized kind of thinking and shame that can sit with you, that I think why it is so important to kind of have that culturally competent support and have more of an understanding that your brain works in a different way. This is, you can thrive with this. You shouldn't have to just survive. It's just about kind of understanding more the strategies. And yes, there's going to be challenges, and there are challenges, but there are different ways to do things, and you do have strengths within that. So I think it's really important to understand that.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful for you to be able to say that and say it as it is, that, yeah, like, actually, it's not fair. Why should I have another label? Why should I have something else to contend with? Life feels hard enough as it is, as say, an immigrant family, or having to do that work twice as hard and have all these expectations and having to prove yourself over and over again. But then move from that place where it can feel that you can sort of stay in that maybe like resentment, to like, okay, how can I find a place of empowerment? How can I find the strength and the strategies and the support, and find a place where I can talk about this and it doesn't feel shameful? And I guess that moves me on to my next question, is, what if someone's listening to this right now and they find that they have had to mask a lot more, and they've not been able to talk about it due to stigmas, or they've not really been able to have this kind of conversation in public? Where would you point people to? Like, what are you doing in this area? And I guess, what do you hope for the future?
I think really don't be afraid to kind of look, if you don't have that support, whether that's in work, don't be afraid to look for that community out there. There is so much support out there, so many podcasts like yourself, so many community groups like ADHD Babes that I mentioned. Am I paying attention? There are two amazing women who do a lot of work looking at ADHD and autism with women. Ellie Middleton does a lot of work with her Mars project. There's so much community out there and support out there. There's so much different kind of ways to understand how to work with your brain. I always say that's so important as well. Like, I've really tried to look at things, and I'm always talking about, when I go into organizations, the importance of understanding that to have more breaks during the day, that's okay. Go for walks. Breaks should be encouraged. Compassionate kind of understanding of how people's different brains work. It really is really helpful for me after meetings, once we've had a meeting, to put something in writing afterwards, just the key points. I think often people can think, when it comes to kind of workplace adjustments or support, that they have to be really expensive or time consuming, but really taking the time to kind of understand what people's challenges are and the better ways that they can work. Simple things can be put in place to make people thrive more. I always encourage taking the time to understand people, and not everyone has a language. Not everyone knows that they're a neurodivergent, but just, I would always encourage you to kind of really understand, sit down with people, start with a kind of strengths-based approach to kind of understand, what do you like to do? I have a form actually that I used to have, but when I was working with people, and it was literally a personal preference form, just to understand how people work in the workplace. So understanding the hours they like to work in the day, how do you like to receive feedback? What do you really enjoy doing? What do you struggle with a bit more? what can we put in place that's helpful? And I think that's often a good starting point to engage with people. And I often would share mine with them as well to make them feel comfortable. So I think there's such simple ways in a working environment or a space to really understand the different ways that people work and what you can bring to a place. I always say that, yeah, don't be afraid to look for support if you can't find it within the comfort of your friends or family. There's so much support out there community-wise. Don't be afraid to kind of, we should all be promoting the importance of like workplace support, but don't be afraid to kind of think about different ways. And I always share that form that I have with people if they need it to start those conversations in work. And I always say, just be kind to yourself. I think people who are neurodivergent, we're our own biggest critics. So like the compassion you show to others, try and show it to yourself. And that's why I always think getting a diagnosis is so helpful if you can get it. Because I think for a lot of women particularly as well, it just helps you to be kinder to yourself, I think, when you kind of have a better understanding. I think having that understanding has helped me. You go through those phases. I often say you go through the phase of grief sometimes when you get it. There's anger for why it took so long. There's those elements of frustration. You're kind of grieving what could have happened or could have been. But I think for me, you definitely start moving to the phase sometimes of understanding more that this is how I do things. And this is like, it gives you a real often better understanding and compassion for yourself. So I would say that, yeah, be kind to yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And what you just said then, that personal preference form, that sounds amazing. I mean, and we should all have that for all relationships. And, you know, like you start going out with someone new, be like, here's my personal preference form.
Yeah.
It would make dating so much easier, wouldn't it?
Yeah, just get an understanding of me from this perspective and how we can like bring these different ways of working and understanding each other. It's a good way to start those conversations.
Yeah, because sometimes it can feel so daunting and overwhelming to kind of say, actually, I do need a walk every hour, or I do like to sit by the window, or that type of lighting really hurts my eyes. Like, it's really hard to say that without feeling, and especially if we've gone through ridicule before, or dismissal, or invalidation, or any of those things, it would be just so terrifying. But if in a workplace and they could just turn around and say, oh, this is like totally normal and it's just out there and it's just done and it's right at the beginning and the difficult conversation's been had. Are you able to share an example of that?
Yes, I'll happily send that over to you. Yeah, because I think it's so important to have that. And like you said, there can feel so much pressure for somebody coming into a new space. And I would say, I think the onus should be on the environment to understand, to share your kind of needs, but also understand theirs. And I think it's always a good way to kind of start that conversation. If people don't really know what support they need, it's a good way to help people think about that, because you can come in and you've often just survived in spaces that you don't even know what support you need. So it can really help people frame that thinking. And then if more support is needed from that conversation, fine. But I think, it's a good support starting point, and it can just be a simple conversation to really understand and also make that person feel comfortable because you're sharing kind of how you work as well.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Abigail, thank you so, so much. I'm going to put all your details in the show notes, including the TED Talk, which was just amazing. We're going to put that form in. And I guess if people are listening to this conversation and kind of thinking, I would love to be able to connect with Abigail, like what services do you do? Like what's kind of on your agenda, for the next year or so?
Yeah, so I'm currently working on getting my website done. And every time I think, I'm like, yeah, that's the ADHD in me. I need to get it out there, because I think sometimes you want something perfect, don't you? And I'm like, no, I just need to get it out there so people have all my information.
A landing page.
Exactly, a landing page to start it off. At the moment, I've been doing a lot of work with organisations. So I was recently working with Crisis, doing some work as well recently with a range of different organisations, kind of just getting them to understand how to create more neuro-inclusive working environments and really thinking about that intersectionality aspect. So I'm doing just a bit of that at the moment. And I can share details where people can access me. Have a blog that I have on LinkedIn as well. So that's kind of the main things. It's basically been kind of working with organisations, getting them how to understand how to create more neuro-inclusive working environments. Also been working with ADHD babes as well, thinking about that kind of community outreach and what work we can do to engage communities as well.
Amazing. Well, it's all honestly so needed and so important. And I hope we hear more voices like yours coming out there and helping more people understand themselves and get that support and the validation and the connection and all of that, because there's a lot more to do. Abigail, thank you so much. It's been amazing. I've loved this conversation.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Kate. I really enjoyed it.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, I invite you to check out my brand new subscription podcast called The Toolkit. Now, this is where I'm going to be opening up my entire library, my vault of information from over the years, my workshops, webinars and courses, my conversations with experts about hormones, nutrition, lifestyle, and bringing brand new, up-to-date content from global experts. This is going to be an amazing resource for you to support you and guide you even more on more niche topics and conversations so you can really thrive and learn to live your best life with ADHD. I'm so excited about this. Please just check out, it's the toolkit on Apple Podcast and you get a free trial. Really hope to see you there.